Welcome to Mesa Verde Crossing in the winter of 1899, where one woman's name is about to become her death sentence. Settle in as we ride into a story of mistaken identity, desperate deals, and a love that refuses to play by the rules. January 1899 brought hunger weeks to Mesa Verde Crossing, Utah Territory, and Alice Sterling stood behind the bar of the Lucky Star Saloon, watching ice form in the water bucket. The red cliffs outside trapped cold air in the canyon town like a stone cellar, and the cattle drive due in 6 days would bring the only real money this settlement would see. Until spring. Alice wiped down the bar top, her dark auburn hair pinned tight against the chill green eyes scanning the empty room. 28 years old, and she'd kept this saloon running through 2 hard winters. But the mine accountant Leland Pendleton had been pushing homesteaders off their land for 3 months now, and she knew her property deeds sat in his sights like a rifle bead. The door swung open, and a man stepped in, snow dusting his shoulders. Tall, sandy brown hair curling under a weathered hat, maybe 30 years old, with a grin that came quick, but eyes that measured twice before moving. He wore a leather duster over a dark vest, and the badge pinned inside his coat caught the lamplight when he pushed the door shut.
"You Alice Hartwell?"
The name hit her like a fist. Alice Hartwell had been dead 3 years, killed in a stage robbery outside Silver City. Alice Sterling had bought this saloon with money saved from working tables in Denver, but the deed had come through a lawyer who'd mixed up paperwork, and she'd never corrected it because fixing legal errors cost money she didn't have.
Depends on who's asking.
Jonah Chambers, bounty hunter. Got a warrant here. Says you killed a mine supervisor in Colorado and fled west.
Alice's hands went still on the bar rack. The cattle drive was 6 days out. Pendleton owned the mine. If she got dragged to a territorial judge now, the saloon would go to auction, and Pendleton would snap it up for pennies, then push out the last 5 families still holding deeds in the canyon.
I'm not Alice Hartwell. Never was. Paperwork got mixed up when I bought this place.
You got proof?
Proof costs money. Lawyers cost money. I've been running this saloon 3 years, and nobody cared about names until now.
Jonah stepped closer, and she saw the way his grin had faded into something more careful. He pulled the warrant from his coat, unfolded it on the bar. The description matched close enough to make her stomach drop. Dark hair, green eyes, late 20s, last seen in Utah Territory.
Warrant's a week old. I take you in. I collect $500. You got anything that says you're not her?
I've got a saloon full of people who'll swear I've been here every day for 3 years.
Witnesses don't beat paper. Not in a territorial court.
Alice pulled in a breath, her mind racing through options like cards in a bad hand. Pendleton had hired guns working for him, men who'd burned out 2 homesteads already. If she ran, she'd lose everything. If she went with Jonah, Pendleton would take the saloon before she ever saw a judge. Then she remembered something her mother had told her once, about desperate times and Old Testament solutions.
What if I had a husband to vouch for me? Man with a badge carries weight in court.
Jonah's eyebrows went up, and that quick grin flickered back for half a second.
You proposing to me?
I'm offering you a deal. You marry me. Vouch that I'm Alice Sterling and always have been, and when this cattle drive comes through, I'll pay you $1,000 from the saloon take. That's double your bounty, And you don't have to drag a woman 300 miles in winter.
And if you're lying, if you really are Alice Hartwell,
then you can collect your bounty after the wedding. Law won't care if you were married to a killer for a week.
Jonah studied her for a long moment, and Alice watched his eyes track from her face to her hands to the tidy bar behind her. She'd seen men assess property before, but the way he looked at her felt different, like he was weighing something that didn't fit on a scale.
I don't treat marriage like a business deal, even a fake one.
Then we're both in trouble. Because I'm out of options and you're about to make a 300-mile ride for a woman who's already dead.
He folded the warrant slowly, tucked it back in his coat. When he looked up, the grin was gone, and something quieter had taken its place.
I'll marry you, but I'm doing it because I think you're telling the truth, not because of the money. And if we're doing this, we're doing it right.
Right how?
Like people who mean it. At least while anyone's watching.
They found the circuit preacher that afternoon in a boarding house 2 streets over. A thin man with wire spectacles who'd been snowed in for a week waiting for the past to clear. He married them in the Lucky Star's back room with the saloon girl Maisie and the stable hand Tom as witnesses. And when Jonah kissed her at the end, it was brief and careful, like he was afraid of overstepping a line they hadn't drawn yet. That night, Alice lay in the narrow bed upstairs, listening to Jonah settle onto the floor with his bedroll. And she wondered what kind of fool made a bargain like this, and then refused to treat it like one. Morning came cold and clear. Alice woke to the smell of coffee and found Jonah already dressed, standing at the window watching the street. He'd made a pot on the stove downstairs and brought 2 cups up, which surprised her more than the wedding had.
We need to figure out who put that warrant out. Nobody files fake paper without a reason.
Leland Pendleton runs the mine accounting. He's been pushing homesteaders off their land for 3 months, and he uses hired guns to do it.
Mine accountant's not usually the type to forge bounty warrants.
He's also a reckless gambler who never forgets a slight. I refused to serve him here last month after he tried to force a homesteader's daughter to sit with him. He doesn't take no well.
Jonah sipped his coffee, still watching the street. Alice noticed the way he stood, weight balanced like he expected trouble to walk up any minute.
You got any proof he's behind this?
Nothing but timing. The warrant's a week old. That's right after I threw him out.
We need more than that. Judge won't take your word over paper, even with me vouching.
Alice set her cup down, crossed to the trunk at the foot of the bed. She pulled out a quilt her mother had made, squares of fabric stitched with care during the last winter before she died. One square had always felt thicker than the others, and Alice had never looked close until now. She ran her fingers over it, found the stitching loose at one corner.
My mother used to say if you needed to hide something important, put it somewhere people look at every day but never really see.
She worked the threads loose and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed and thin. It was a note in her mother's hand, dated 2 years before Alice had bought the saloon. The words were simple but clear. Alice Hartwell died in Silver City stage robbery, September 1896. My daughter Alice Sterling must never be confused with her. Papers filed under wrong name by mistake. Lawyer was Terrence Moon of Denver.
Your mother knew about the name mix-up.
She must have. And she hid this here so I'd find it if I needed proof.
We need to get to Terrence Moon. If he can testify the paperwork was wrong from the start, that warrant falls apart.
Denver's 4 days' ride in good weather. We've got 6 days before the cattle drive. And Pendleton's got men watching the roads.
Then, we don't take the roads.
They left an hour later, Alice in a split riding skirt under her coat, and Jonah on a roan gelding that moved like it knew trouble when it smelled it. The canyon trails were narrow and icy, red cliffs rising on both sides like walls built to trap sound. Jonah led them east through passes Alice had never ridden, places where the rock squeezed so tight she could touch both sides at once. By midday, they'd cleared the first ridge and dropped into scrub country where the wind cut like knives. Jonah pulled up near a stand of juniper, dismounted to check the horses.
We're being followed. 2 riders, maybe 3. Stayed back in the canyon, but they're closing now.
Pendleton's men?
Or someone who wants that bounty. Either way, we can't outrun them on this terrain.
Alice slid down from her horse, pulled the rifle from her saddle scabbard. Her hands were steady, even though her heart hammered against her ribs.
Then, we don't run.
You know how to use that?
I've kept a saloon in a canyon town for 3 years. What do you think?
Jonah's grin came back, quick and bright. He pulled his own rifle, checked the load, then nodded toward a cluster of boulders 50 yards downslope.
We set up there. Let them come to us.
They made it to the rocks with minutes to spare. Alice wedged herself between 2 boulders, rifle barrel resting on stone, and watched the trail. Jonah crouched 10 feet to her right, his hat pulled low against the wind. The riders came into view moving fast, 3 of them on dark horses. She recognized the lead man, a hired gun named Cade, who'd worked for Pendleton since fall.
That's Cade. He burned out the Porter's homestead in November.
Let them get close. We're not starting a fight we can avoid.
But Cade had other plans. He reined up 60 yards out and raised his rifle. No warning, no words. The shot cracked across the scrub and sparked off the rock 6 inches from Alice's head. Jonah returned fire immediately, his bullet taking Cade's hat clean off. The other 2 riders scattered, circling wide to flank.
Stay low. They want you alive for the bounty.
What about you?
I'm just in the way.
The next 5 minutes burned through ammunition and adrenaline in equal measure. Alice fired twice, keeping the left rider pinned behind a dead tree. Jonah worked the right side, his shots precise and patient. Cade tried to close the distance once and took a round through his coat sleeve that made him pull back cursing. Finally, the hired guns broke off, retreating fast toward the canyon.
They'll be back with more men. We need to move, now.
They rode hard through the afternoon, putting miles between them and Mesa Verde Crossing. By sunset, they'd reached a line shack tucked against a cliff face, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but solid enough to hold heat. Jonah built a fire while Alice saw to the horses, and they ate cold biscuits and jerky without talking much.
You didn't have to come with me. You could have just left.
We're married. That means something.
It was a deal.
I told you I don't treat it like one. I meant that.
Alice studied him across the fire, trying to figure out what kind of man walked into a stranger's saloon and married her on a bad warrant, then refused to act like it was business. His eyes were steady on hers. No grin now, just something quiet and sure that made her chest feel tight.
Why'd you really agree to marry me?
Because you were scared, but you didn't run. Because you stood there and tried to make a deal instead of pulling iron. And because I've been hunting bad men for 5 years, and I know the difference between someone who's guilty and someone who's just out of options.
She wanted to say something back, but the words stuck in her throat, so she just nodded and looked away. at the fire instead of him. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shack's thin walls.
Get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow.
Morning broke gray and cold. They made Denver by the third day, riding into the rail yard district where lawyers kept offices above mercantile stores. Terrence Moon's sign hung outside a narrow building squeezed between a feed store and a gunsmith. Alice climbed the stairs with Jonah right behind her, and they found the lawyer at his desk. An older man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that magnified his eyes. Moon remembered the paperwork immediately, his face flushing when Alice explained the warrant. The lawyer said he'd filed the Saloon deed under the wrong name, a clerical error he'd meant to fix but had never gotten around to. He swore he'd testify, and he wrote out an affidavit on the spot, signing and sealing it with wax. Alice folded it carefully and tucked it inside her coat.
This clears me?
Gets us halfway. We still need to prove Pendleton forged the warrant.
How do we do that?
We ask him.
They left Denver that afternoon, pushing the horses harder than safe. By the fourth night, they'd circled back toward Mesa Verde Crossing, coming in from the east through passes that avoided the main roads. Jonah reined up on a ridge overlooking the canyon town, lamplight glowing in windows below.
Pendleton's got an office in the mine headquarters. We go in quiet, find his records, get out before anyone knows we were there.
And if we get caught?
Then, we get loud.
They waited until midnight, then left the horses hidden in a wash and moved down into town on foot. The mine headquarters sat at the north end of the settlement, a two-story building with a clerk's office downstairs and Pendleton's private rooms above. Jonah picked the lock on the back door in under a minute, and they slipped inside, moving through darkness with Alice's hand on his shoulder for guidance. Pendleton's office was locked, but the window wasn't. Jonah climbed through and helped Alice up after him. They worked by matchlight, sorting through ledgers and files stacked on a heavy oak desk. Alice found the mine accounts first, columns of numbers that didn't add up right. Money disappearing into entries marked miscellaneous expenses.
He's been stealing from the mine for months. Thousands of dollars.
That's motive to force people off land. He needs to cover the losses before the owners audit the books.
Then Jonah found the file tucked under the desk blotter. Inside were copies of 3 bounty warrants, all with fake names, all matching real women in the territory. Alice's was the third. The first 2 had already been paid out, the women arrested and transported, before anyone realized the warrants were forged.
He's been doing this all winter, arresting women on fake warrants, taking their property when they can't fight back.
We've got him. This proves everything.
The door crashed open, and lamplight flooded the room. Leland Pendleton stood in the doorway with Cade and 2 other hired guns behind him, all armed. Pendleton was a thin man with cold eyes and the kind of smile that never reached past his teeth. He held a pistol aimed steady at Jonah's chest. Pendleton said he'd known they'd come back eventually, that desperate people always made predictable mistakes. He said the warrants were clean work, that no territorial judge would believe a saloon owner and a bounty hunter over a respected mine accountant. He told Cade to take Alice downstairs and put her on a horse for the ride to the territorial marshal. And then he made his first mistake. He turned his back on Jonah to look at the ledgers on the desk. Jonah moved like a landslide, fast and inevitable. He hit Pendleton low and hard, driving him into the desk. Alice grabbed the nearest lamp and threw it at Cade, glass shattering and oil spraying across his coat. The other 2 guns tried to aim, but Alice was already moving, diving behind the desk as shots cracked through the small room. Jonah wrestled Pendleton's pistol away and fired twice, dropping one hired gun and sending the other scrambling for the door. Cade lunged for Alice and she met him with a wooden chair, breaking it across his shoulders and sending him sprawling. Jonah kicked Pendleton's legs out and dropped him face first onto the floor, then pinned him with a knee between his shoulder blades. The last hired gun ran, boots pounding down the stairs and out into the night.
You're done, Pendleton. We've got your ledgers, we've got your fake warrants, and we've got enough witnesses to hang you twice.
Pendleton spat blood and curses, but didn't struggle. Alice gathered up the files and ledgers, while Jonah tied Pendleton's hands with the man's own belt. Cade groaned on the floor, half conscious and no threat. They hauled Pendleton downstairs and found half the town gathered in the street, drawn by the gunfire. The sheriff came running from the saloon, out of breath and wide-eyed. Alice handed over the files and affidavit, explained everything in quick, sharp sentences, while Jonah kept his rifle on Pendleton. The sheriff read through the papers twice, his face going darker with each page. He said the territorial judge would be through in 2 days, that Pendleton would sit in the town jail until then, and that the fake warrants would be thrown out immediately.
What about the women he already arrested?
The sheriff promised he'd send word to have them released and their property returned. Then, he took Pendleton away, Cade stumbling after them in irons, and the crowd started to break up. Alice stood in the cold street with Jonah beside her, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaky.
You all right?
I think so. That was closer than I like.
You swing a mean chair.
She laughed, a short, breathless sound that hurt her ribs. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, stars fading to gray. In 2 days, the cattle drive would roll through, and the saloon would be packed with cowhands spending their pay. Life would go back to normal, except for the part where she was married to a bounty hunter who'd fought beside her like they'd been doing it for years.
The deal's done. Warrant's gone. Pendleton's caught. You don't have to stay married to me if you don't want to.
What if I want to?
Alice looked at him, really looked, at the way the lamplight caught the edges of his face and the quiet certainty in his eyes. She thought about the way he'd stood with her, the way he'd refused to treat their marriage like a transaction, even when she'd offered it that way.
Then I guess you're stuck with a saloon owner who throws chairs at hired guns.
Could be worse. Could be married to someone boring.
The cattle drive came through on schedule 2 days later, right after the judge cleared Alice of all charges and sentenced Pendleton to 15 years. The Lucky Star filled with cowhands and drovers, money flowing across the bar in a steady stream. Alice worked from dawn until midnight, pouring drinks and keeping order. And Jonah stood near the door, watching her like he was memorizing the way she moved through chaos, without flinching. When the last cowan stumbled out near 2 a.m, Alice locked the door and turned to find Jonah waiting with 2 glasses of whiskey. They sat at the bar in the quiet, exhaustion settling into their bones like dust.
You're not taking the bounty hunter jobs anymore?
Thinking about staying local. Town could use a deputy, and the sheriff already asked.
You'd be good at it.
And I'd be close to my wife.
She sipped her whiskey, let the burn settle in her chest. Close to my wife. The word sat between them like something solid, something real.
We never talked about what this marriage actually means. After all this...
Means I wake up next to you instead of on your floor. Means I stop pretending I only married you for the right reasons and admit I wanted to the minute you tried to bargain with me.
Alice set her glass down carefully, afraid if she moved too fast this moment would crack apart. Jonah reached across the bar and took her hand, his fingers rough and warm.
I know we started this backward, but I'd like to try forward now, if you want to.
Forward sounds good.
He came around the bar and kissed her, slow and careful like that first time, but deeper now, like he meant it to last. Alice leaned into him and let herself feel what she'd been pushing down for days, the way her chest went tight when he smiled, the way her hands steadied when he was near, the way this strange backward marriage had turned into something she didn't want to lose.
So we're really doing this? No more deals? No more bargains?
Just us. However that works.
I can work with that.
The winter eased slowly into spring over the next weeks. Jonah took the deputy job and moved his things upstairs to Alice's room properly. No more bedrolls on the floor. They fell into rhythms that felt like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Him checking in at the saloon between rounds, her saving him supper when he worked late. The town rebuilt what Pendleton had broken, homesteaders returning to their land with the mine's stolen money recovered and distributed as restitution. By March, the canyon walls started to show green, and Alice's mother's quilt hung on the bedroom wall, where she could see it every morning. The note stayed tucked back in its square, a reminder that sometimes the things you need most are hidden in places you look every day, but never really see. On the first warm evening, Alice stood outside the saloon, watching the sunset paint the red cliffs orange and gold. Jonah came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and they stood like that until the light faded to purple.
You ever regret taking that warrant?
Every day.
She turned in his arms, ready to be offended, but he was grinning.
I regret not meeting you some other way. One where I didn't have to arrest you first.
Where's the fun in that?
Fair point. You do like throwing chairs at people.
She kissed him to shut him up, and he kissed her back like he'd been waiting for the excuse. Behind them, the saloon doors swung open, and someone called for service. But Alice ignored it for another minute, holding on to this moment where the danger was past and the future stretched out warm and clear. The next cattle drive came through in May, and the one after that in July. Each time the lucky star filled with cowhands and coin, and each time Jonah stood near the door, watching Alice work with that same quiet look he'd had since the first night. By summer's end, they'd saved enough to buy out the mercantile next door and expand, turning the Lucky Star into something bigger and steadier. People in Mesa Verde Crossing stopped asking about the marriage that had started with a warrant and a bargain. They just saw the deputy and the saloon owner, the way they moved around each other like two parts of the same dance, the way he brought her coffee every morning and she saved him the best cuts of meat at supper. Some stories don't need explaining. Some just need time to prove themselves real. On an August evening when the heat finally broke and cool air spilled down from the cliffs, Alice and Jonah rode out to the ridge where they'd first been ambushed. The scrub country looked different in summer. Green instead of gray. Alive instead of desperate. They sat on the rocks where they'd sheltered and watched the sun drop behind the western peaks.
I never thanked you properly. For believing me when you didn't have to.
You offered me a deal I couldn't refuse.
You refused to treat it like one.
That's different. I took the deal. I just didn't like the terms.
Alice leaned against him, felt his arm come around her shoulders solid and sure. Down in the canyon, the town lights were starting to glow, warm points in the gathering dark.
What would you have done if I really had been Alice Hartwell? If you'd Been wrong?
Turned you in. Collected the bounty. Felt terrible about it for the rest of my life.
Terrible enough to visit me in prison?
Probably would have tried to break you out. Got myself arrested too. Real romantic ending.
She laughed and he grinned, and they sat there until the stars came out thick and bright overhead. Finally, they rode back down into town, the horses picking their way carefully over the darkening trail. The Lucky Star was already filling with the evening crowd when they arrived, voices and laughter spilling out into the street. September brought the last drive of the season, cowhands moving south before the mountain passes closed with snow. Alice worked the bar with practiced efficiency, while Jonah helped keep order, breaking up 2 fights before they got serious, and escorting 3 too-drunk drovers to sleep it off in the stable. Near midnight, a cowhand named Wesley got loud about a poker hand he swore was rigged, and Alice had to threaten him with a shotgun before he settled down and paid his tab.
You really would have shot him?
Probably not. But he doesn't know that.
Remind me never to cheat at cards in your place.
You don't play cards.
Exactly.
The last cowhand cleared out near 1 in the morning, and Alice locked up while Jonah counted the register. They'd made enough to cover supplies through winter and put away a decent cushion besides. Upstairs, Alice pulled off her boots and collapsed onto the bed, every muscle aching.
I'm getting too old for cattle drive season,
You're 30. That's not old.
says the man who didn't pour drinks for 600 cowhands this week.
Jonah stretched out beside her, still dressed, except for his hat and gun belt. They lay in the dark, listening to the building settle, the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood cooling in the night air.
Sheriff's talking about retiring next spring. Wants me to take over.
You want to?
Means I'd be around more. Means we could think about things besides just getting through each season.
Things like... what?
Like maybe a family. If you wanted.
Alice turned her head to look at him, saw the careful way he watched her in the dim light from the window. They'd been married 8 months, and in that time, they'd built something steady out of chaos and desperation. But they hadn't talked much about what came after the building part.
I'd want that. When the time's right.
Good. Because I've been thinking about it a while.
How long's a while?
Since about the 2nd week. When you threw that chair at Cade.
She laughed and swatted his arm, and he caught her hand and held it against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat steady and strong. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in the narrow bed, the quilt her mother made tucked around them both. October turned the canyon walls to rust and gold. The mine brought in new management after Pendleton's trial. Honest men who paid fair wages and kept clean books. The 5 families who'd held on to their homesteads expanded their herds, and Mesa Verde Crossing started to feel less like a desperate outpost and more like a real town with a future. Alice and Jonah settled into the kind of partnership that looked easy from outside, but had been built on trust, earned through fire and uncertainty. She ran the saloon, and he kept the peace, and when they crossed paths during the day, they'd exchange quick touches and quicker grins, the kind of casual intimacy that marked couples who'd chosen each other and meant it. The territorial judge came through in November to finalize land claims and marriage certificates. Alice and Jonah stood in the courthouse with a dozen other couples. But when the judge called their names and asked if they freely chose this marriage, Jonah looked at her with that same quiet certainty he'd had the first day.
I do. Have since the beginning.
Me too. Even when I said it was a deal.
The judge signed the papers making it official by territorial law, not just frontier necessity, and Alice folded the certificate carefully before tucking it into her coat. Outside the courthouse, Jonah stopped her with a hand on her arm.
Want to do something we should have done months ago?
What's that?
Have a real wedding night. One where we're not running from hired guns or hiding from warrants.
She kissed him right there on the courthouse steps, not caring who saw, and his arms came around her like they'd been waiting for the invitation. They walked back to the Lucky Star hand in hand, and for the first time since January, Alice felt the weight of fear and uncertainty finally lift completely. Winter came down hard in December, snow piling in drifts against the canyon walls and ice forming thick on the water troughs. The saloon stayed busy with locals riding out the cold months, playing cards and trading stories while the wind howled outside. Jonah brought in firewood every morning, and Alice made stew that simmered all day on the stove, filling the place with smells that made people linger longer than they planned. On Christmas Eve, they closed early and sat by the fire upstairs, Alice's head on Jonah's shoulder and his hand tangled in her hair. The quilt wrapped around them both, and Alice traced the square where her mother's note had been hidden, thinking about how strange life turned out when you stopped trying to control every piece.
You think your bounty hunting days are really done?
I think I found something worth staying for.
The deputy job?
You. The job's just a bonus.
She turned to kiss him, and he met her halfway, the fire crackling beside them and snow tapping soft against the window. They'd started with a warrant and a desperate bargain, but they'd built something real out of necessity and choice tangled together until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. January came around again, marking 1 full year since Jonah had walked into the Lucky Star with a badge and a bad warrant. Alice stood behind the bar on the anniversary of that day, wiping down the same wood surface where she'd first tried to bargain her way out of disaster. The saloon was quiet in the afternoon lull. Just a few regulars, playing cards in the corner. Jonah came in shaking snow off his coat, his deputy star catching the lamplight. He crossed to the bar and leaned on it, grinning.
1 year ago today, I made the best mistake of my life.
Marrying a woman on a fake warrant?
Believing her when she said she was someone else.
I was someone else, just not the someone on the paper.
You were exactly who you needed to be.
Alice poured him coffee without asking, the gesture automatic now. He wrapped his hands around the cup and watched her move behind the bar. That same look he'd had since the beginning, like he was still figuring out how he'd gotten this lucky.
Sheriff made his retirement official yesterday. You're taking over next month.
Means I'll be around even more. You going to get tired of me?
Ask me in another year.
I'm going to ask you every year until we're old.
That works for me.
The door swung open, and a Cowan came in stamping snow off his boots, looking for a hot meal and a warm fire. Alice moved to help him, and Jonah stayed at the bar watching her work. And if anyone had asked him in that moment whether he regretted taking that warrant a year ago, he would have said yes and no in the same breath. Yes, because it brought danger. No, because it brought her. February thawed into March, and the cattle season started gearing up again. Word spread through the territory about the Lucky Star and the couple who ran it. The saloon owner who'd been wrongly accused, and the bounty hunter who'd married her to prove she was innocent. Some people said it was romantic. Others said it was reckless. Alice and Jonah didn't much care either way. They knew what they'd built and how they'd built it, and that was enough. On a clear April morning, when the canyon walls blazed orange in the sunrise, Alice woke to find Jonah already up and dressed, standing at the window with his coffee. She joined him, wrapping the quilt around her shoulders against the lingering chill.
What are you thinking about?
How different things could have gone if you'd run instead of bargained. If I'd taken you in instead of believing you.
But you didn't.
No, I didn't.
She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Down in the street, people were starting to move, opening shops and calling greetings. The town waking up to another day. The cattle drive would arrive in a week, bringing money and chaos in equal measure, and they'd handle it like they handled everything else now. Together.
You ever miss bounty hunting? The road, the chase, all that?
Sometimes. Then I remember I traded it for something better.
A saloon? And a wife who throws furniture?
Exactly that.
She laughed, and he kissed the top of her head. And they stood there, watching the sun climb higher, until the breakfast crowd started arriving and pulled them back into the day's rhythm. The lucky star filled and emptied. Filled and emptied, seasons turning the way they always did in the territory. People came and went, but Alice and Jonah stayed, building their life one day at a time in the canyon town that had tried to trap them both and ended up giving them each other instead. May brought the first major drive of the season, herds moving north towards summer grazing in Montana. The lucky star packed with drovers, and the saloon rang with voices and laughter until past midnight, every night, for a week. Alice worked herself near exhaustion, and Jonah backed her up, keeping fights from starting and helping close up when the last cowhand finally stumbled out. On the final night of the drive, after the doors were locked and the register counted, they sat on the back steps of the saloon, watching stars wheel overhead. The air smelled like dust and horses, and the faint green scent of spring in the canyon. Jonah had his arm around Alice's shoulders, and she leaned into him, too tired to sit up straight.
You did good this week.
We did good. Couldn't have managed it alone.
That's what marriage is. Not managing it alone.
Is that the official bounty hunter definition?
It's the Jonah Chambers definition. Only one that matters to me.
She turned her head to look at him, saw the familiar lines of his face softened by starlight and exhaustion. A year and a half ago, she'd been standing behind that bar alone, watching ice form in the water bucket, and wondering how she'd make it through another winter. Now she had a partner who stood with her through cattle drives and hired guns, and the ordinary hard work of building something that lasted.
I love you. In case I haven't said it lately.
You said it this morning, and yesterday, and the day before.
Just making sure you remember.
I remember everything about you, even the parts from before I met you.
That doesn't make sense.
Neither did marrying you on a fake warrant. But here we are.
She kissed him. Because she could. Because they were alone under the stars, with the hard week behind them, and another season stretching out ahead. His hand came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back like he had all the time in the world, like they hadn't been working 16-hour days, and wouldn't have to get up early tomorrow to start again. They stayed there until the cold drove them inside, then climbed the stairs to their room where the quilt waited on the bed, and the window showed the canyon wall standing guard in the darkness. Alice undressed slowly, every muscle aching, and Jonah did the same. They fell into bed tangled together the way they always did now, the way that felt natural after a year and a half of practice.
Next season, we're hiring more help.
Already put the word out. 2 experienced bar hands want the work.
When did you do that?
While you were talking to that drover about his rowdy friends, I can plan ahead sometimes.
Sometimes?
When I'm not busy being married to a woman who keeps me on my toes.
She laughed and elbowed him gently, and he caught her hand and held it against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat slowing toward sleep. They drifted off like that, the saloon quiet below them, and the town settling into the peaceful hours before dawn. June passed in a blur of work and heat and brief stolen moments when they could catch their breath. The new bar hands started in July and proved worth their pay, giving Alice enough breathing room to actually enjoy the cattle drives instead of just surviving them. Jonah's work as sheriff kept him busy but not gone, and he made it home for supper most nights, which was more than Alice had expected when he took the job. On a hot August evening, they rode out to the ridge again, the place that had become theirs without them really deciding it. They sat on the same rocks where they'd fought off Cade and his men, but now the scrub was green and the sky was clear, and the only danger was sunburn if they stayed too long.
Hard to believe it's been a year and a half. Feels longer somehow.
Feels like we've been doing this forever.
In a good way?
In the best way.
Alice leaned back against the warm stone and closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face and Jonah's presence solid beside her. They'd earned this peace, earned it through trust and grit, and refusing to let fear make their decisions. The warrant was long gone. Pendleton was serving his sentence, and Mesa Verde Crossing had become home in a way Alice had never expected when she'd first bought the Lucky Star with mixed-up paperwork and a prayer.
You ever think about that note your mother left in the quilt?
All the time. She knew I'd need it someday. Knew I'd look for it when things got bad enough.
Smart woman.
She was. I wish she could have met you.
She'd probably have thrown me out for walking in with a warrant.
Probably. Then let you back in when she saw you meant to help.
Jonah took her hand and laced their fingers together, and they sat like that until the sun started dropping toward the western peaks. Finally, they mounted up and rode back down into the canyon, into the town that had tested them both and let them prove what they were made of when pushed to the edge. September brought the last drive of the season, smaller than the summer runs but still profitable. The Lucky Star handled it easily with the extra help, and Alice actually got to sit down and play cards with some of the drovers instead of working straight through the night. Jonah watched from the bar, grinning every time she won a hand, which was most of them. After the drive moved on and the town settled back into its regular rhythm, Alice stood outside the saloon one evening, watching the first hints of fall color appear on the canyon walls. Jonah came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder.
What are you thinking about?
How glad I am you walked in that door with a bad warrant.
That's a strange thing to be glad about.
It brought you here. Brought us here. Strange, but true.
You would have been fine without me. You're always fine.
Maybe. But I'm better with you.
He turned her around and kissed her properly, the kind of kiss that still made her stomach flip even after all this time. Behind them, someone called out a greeting, and they broke apart, grinning like caught teenagers. Life in Mesa Verde Crossing went on around them, steady and real, and built to last. October marked 2 years since Pendleton's trial. Alice and Jonah made the trip to the territorial prison to give testimony for the parole board, and they both voted to keep him locked up the full 15. The board agreed. On the ride home, they stopped at the courthouse and looked at the marriage certificate framed on the wall now. Part of the territory's official record of couples who'd made it legal.
2 years. Feels like yesterday and forever ago, at the same time.
Good forever or bad forever?
The best kind.
They made it back to Mesa Verde Crossing by sunset, the canyon walls glowing red and gold in the last light. The Lucky Star's lamps were already burning, the evening crowd starting to gather. Alice and Jonah dismounted in the stable and saw to the horses together. The work familiar and easy now.
I've been thinking about something.
What's that?
Maybe expanding the saloon again. Adding rooms upstairs for rent. Could use the extra income.
Could also use the rooms for other things. Eventually.
What kind of other things?
The kind that need a nursery.
Jonah stopped with the saddle halfway off his horse, his eyes going wide. Alice watched him process what she'd just said. Saw the moment it clicked into place.
You're saying what I think you're saying?
If you think I'm saying we might need that nursery sooner than later, then yes.
He dropped the saddle and crossed to her in 3 steps, his hands framing her face, his eyes searching hers.
You're sure?
Doc confirmed it yesterday. Wanted to tell you when the time felt right.
And now feels right.
After facing down Pendleton one last time? Yes. Now feels right.
He kissed her like she was something precious that might break if he wasn't careful. Then pulled back and laughed. Pure joy and surprise tangled together. Alice laughed too, relief and excitement, and a little fear all mixing in her chest. But the good kind of fear. The kind that came from stepping into something new instead of running from something bad.
We're having a baby.
In about 6 months. Yes.
I'm going to be a father.
You're going to be a great father. You're already a great husband.
I'm going to build that nursery this winter. Best one in the territory.
I know you will.
They finished with the horses and walked to the saloon hand in hand, the evening crowd's noise spilling out into the street. Maisie met them at the door with questions about the parole hearing, and Alice answered while Jonah stood beside her grinning like he'd won every bounty in the West. That night, after the saloon closed, they lay in bed with Jonah's hand resting gentle on Alice's stomach, his voice soft in the darkness.
Thank you for taking a chance on me. Back when you had no reason to.
Thank you for believing me when you could have just taken the easy bounty.
Nothing about you has ever been easy. That's why I stayed.
That's the worst compliment I've ever gotten.
It's the best one I know how to give.
She kissed him to shut him up, and he kissed her back like he'd been waiting for permission. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them winter was coming. But inside they were warm and safe, and building something that would last longer than any season. November brought the first snow, and Jonah started on the nursery immediately, working evenings and weekends to add a room off their bedroom. Alice ran the saloon through the quiet winter months and watched her belly start to round, watched Jonah measure and cut and hammer with careful precision. The town women brought advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, and Alice accepted it all with gratitude mixed with terror, because she'd kept a saloon through 2 hard winters, but she'd never kept a baby through anything.
What if I'm not good at this?
At what?
Being a mother. Keeping a tiny person alive. All of it.
You kept a whole saloon alive through Pendleton, trying to steal it. You'll be fine.
That's different. Saloons don't cry or need feeding every 2 hours.
True. But you've got me. We'll figure it out together.
She believed him because she'd seen him figure out harder things, seen him walk into danger beside her without hesitation. If they could survive hired guns and fake warrants and winter in the canyon, they could probably handle a baby. Probably. December passed in a blur of preparations. Jonah finished the nursery 2 weeks before Christmas, painting it soft yellow because they didn't know yet if they were having a boy or girl. Alice's mother's quilt got cleaned and mended, ready to wrap around a new generation. The saloon stayed busy with holiday travelers, and Alice worked until she couldn't stand anymore, then sat behind the bar on a stool Jonah built special. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire again, second Christmas together, and Jonah had his hand on her belly when the baby kicked hard enough for him to feel it. His face went through 6 expressions in 3 seconds, landing on wonder.
That's our baby.
That's our baby.
I can't believe this is real.
Better believe it. Come April, we're going to be responsible for keeping a whole new person alive.
April can't come fast enough.
Ask me that again in about 4 months.
January marked 3 years since Jonah had walked into the Lucky Star. 3 years since Alice had stood behind that bar, trying to bargain her way out of a death sentence. The anniversary felt heavier this year with the baby coming, and the future stretching out in directions they could see clear for the first time. Jonah was sheriff now, respected and steady. Alice ran the best saloon in the territory. They had a home and a life and a child on the way, built from nothing but necessity and trust, and the stubborn refusal to give up when things got hard. February brought warmer days, and Alice's increasing discomfort. She gave up standing behind the bar completely and handled the bookkeeping instead, letting Maisie and the other bar hands run the floor. Jonah brought her tea and pillows and worried visibly every time she winced.
Stop hovering. I'm pregnant, not dying.
I'm not hovering. I'm attentively present.
That's the same thing.
It's really not.
But she let him fuss, because she could see the fear under the excitement. The same fear she felt when she thought too hard about the actual birthing part. Women died in childbirth. Everyone knew someone who had. But the doc was good, and Alice was strong, and they had each other, which was more than a lot of people had. March blew in cold and wet, and Alice spent most of it nesting, organizing the nursery over and over, until Jonah gently suggested maybe it was organized enough. The baby had other ideas, and came early, 2 weeks before the due date, on a windy March evening when the saloon was half empty and Jonah was making his rounds. Alice's water broke while she was sorting receipts, and Maisie ran screaming for the doc and Jonah both. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day, long and hard and frightening in ways Alice hadn't prepared for. But Jonah stayed beside her the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her face, and telling her she was doing great, even when she wanted to punch him for getting her into this situation in the first place. The baby came just after noon, a girl with dark hair and green eyes and lungs that announced her arrival to half the territory. The doc cleaned her up and wrapped her tight, then handed her to Alice, who looked down at the tiny squirming person and felt her entire world realign around this moment.
She's perfect.
She's beautiful. Like her mother.
The baby yawned and blinked up at them with unfocused eyes, and Jonah reached out to touch one tiny fist. His hand was shaking, and his eyes were wet, and Alice had never loved him more than she did in that moment.
What do we call her?
I was thinking about your mother. if you want.
Catherine. After my mother. Catherine Rose Chambers.
That's perfect.
They spent the next hour just watching Catherine sleep, marveling at every breath and twitch. The doc checked Alice over, declared her healthy and recovering well, then left them alone with their daughter and their wonder. Outside, the wind died down, and the afternoon sun broke through clouds, painting the room in golden light. Later that evening, after Alice had slept and Catherine had nursed for the first time and promptly fallen back asleep, Jonah sat in the rocking chair he'd built for the nursery, their daughter tiny against his chest. Alice watched from the bed, exhausted and sore and happier than she'd ever been.
3 years ago, I walked in here planning to arrest you.
3 years ago, I tried to bribe you into marriage.
And now, we're here.
And now, we're here.
I'd do it all again. Every minute.
Even the part where hired guns tried to kill us?
Especially that part. It made the rest of this possible.
Alice closed her eyes and listened to the creak of the rocking chair, the soft sounds of Catherine breathing, the familiar noises of the saloon below. 3 years ago, she'd been alone and desperate, standing behind a bar watching ice form and wondering how she'd survive another winter. Now she had a husband who'd fought beside her, a daughter who carried her mother's name, and a life built on trust earned through fire. The story could have ended a dozen different ways, most of them bad. But it hadn't. It had ended here, in a room painted yellow with a baby sleeping, and a man who'd refused to treat their marriage like a bargain, even when she'd offered it that way. Some stories don't need explaining. Some just need time to prove themselves real. April brought warmer weather and Catherine's first smiles. Alice healed and got stronger, and Jonah split his time between sheriff work and helping with the baby, learning to change diapers and mix bottles like he'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. The saloon ran smooth with Maisie managing the floor, and Alice handled the books from a chair in the nursery, while Catherine napped nearby. On a warm May morning when the canyon walls blazed red and the air smelled like sage, Alice and Jonah took Catherine out to the ridge for the first time. They sat on their rocks with the baby bundled between them, watching clouds move across the sky. Catherine made small noises and waved her fists at the sunshine, and Alice felt the last pieces of the old fear finally let go completely.
She's going to grow up knowing this place, knowing us, knowing we chose each other and chose her.
Best gift we can give her.
Better than a saloon?
Way better than a saloon.
They stayed until Catherine got fussy and needed feeding, then rode back down into the canyon, where the Lucky Star stood solid and steady, where their life waited to be lived one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. The cattle drives would come and go. Seasons would turn. Catherine would grow. But the foundation they'd built would hold, because it was built on truth they'd fought for, and trust they'd earned, and love they'd chosen, even when it came wrapped in warrants and desperation. 3 years from a bad warrant to a baby girl, from bargains and bounties to marriage and family, from standing alone behind a bar watching ice form to sitting on a ridge with a husband and daughter watching clouds drift past. Alice Sterling Chambers, formerly mistaken for a dead woman, now very much alive and building a future that looked nothing like the past she'd survived. The story had started with a lie, or at least a mistake, but it had become the truest thing in her life. And if anyone asked her whether she regretted that day Jonah walked through her door with a warrant and a choice, she'd tell them the same thing she told him. she'd do it all again. Every desperate minute. Every dangerous choice. Because it led here, to this moment, to this life, to this family that started as a deal and became something no bargain could ever measure. June arrived with the first major cattle drive of the season, and the lucky star filled like always. But this year, Alice watched from the upstairs window with Catherine in her arms, watching Jonah help Maisie manage the crowd below. She'd earned the right to step back, to let others handle the chaos while she handled this small new life that needed her more.
You miss it? Being down there in the middle of everything?
Alice turned to find Jonah standing in the doorway, his sheriff's badge catching the lamplight, his eyes soft on her and Catherine both.
Sometimes. But this is better.
You can go back down any time. Maisie's got it covered.
I know. But I'm exactly where I want to be right now.
He crossed the room and put his arms around them both. His family. The three of them standing at the window, watching the town move and breathe below. The cattle drive would pass through and move on. Summer would turn to fall. Catherine would grow and change. Life would keep moving forward the way it always did, carrying them along toward whatever came next. But right now, in this moment, Alice had everything she'd fought for, and more than she'd dreamed of, when she stood behind that bar 3 years ago, trying to bargain with a bounty hunter who refused to play by the expected rules. Right now was enough. Right now was everything. The sun dropped behind the western peaks, and Jonah went back downstairs to help with the evening rush. Alice fed Catherine and rocked her to sleep, then laid her in the cradle Jonah had built with his own hands. She stood looking down at her daughter for a long moment, thinking about her mother's note hidden in the quilt, about the way some things stayed hidden until you needed them most. Maybe someday she'd tell Catherine about the warrant and the bargain and the desperate deal that brought her parents together. Maybe she'd explain how sometimes the best things in life started as the worst, and how love could grow in the strangest soil if you were brave enough to let it. Or maybe she'd just let Catherine grow up, knowing her parents loved each other and loved her, and that would be enough. Downstairs, the saloon roared with voices and laughter, the sound of life being lived loud and messy and real. Alice listened to it for a moment, then closed the nursery door and climbed into bed, exhausted and content. Jonah would come up later when the last cowhand cleared out, and he'd check on Catherine first thing like he always did, then slide into bed beside Alice like he belonged there. Because he did. They both did. This was home, built from a bad warrant and a desperate woman and a bounty hunter who'd seen through the lies to the truth underneath. 3 years from that cold January day to this warm June night. From alone to together. From desperate to content. From bargains to love that didn't need deals or terms to make it real. Alice closed her eyes and let sleep take her, knowing when she woke up, Jonah would be there, and Catherine would need feeding, and the saloon would need running, and life would continue being exactly as hard and exactly as good as it had always been. Some stories end with a kiss at a train station, the whistle blowing, and the future rolling in on steel rails. But this story ended here, in a room above a saloon, in a canyon town in Utah territory, with a baby sleeping, and a husband working, and a woman who'd learned that sometimes the best way to survive was to trust the person standing beside you, even when you had no reason to. Especially when you had no reason to. The warrant had been a lie. The bargain had been desperate. But the marriage was real, and the baby was real, and the life they'd built together was real. And that was all that mattered in the end. Not how it started, just that it lasted. July passed, and August came, and the cattle season wound toward its end. Catherine grew and changed every day, learning to hold her head up and track movement with her eyes. Jonah got promoted to territorial marshal, a position that meant more responsibility, but also meant he could work from Mesa Verde Crossing instead of traveling. Alice expanded the saloon again, adding the upstairs rooms they'd talked about, turning the Lucky Star into a real establishment that could compete with anything in Salt Lake City. On a hot August afternoon, they rode out to the ridge one more time. All three of them, Catherine awake and curious in Alice's arms. They sat on the familiar rocks and looked out over the canyon that had been their battleground and their home, the place where they'd proved what they were made of when tested.
You ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone different? If you'd run instead of bargaining? If I'd arrested you instead of believing you?
Sometimes. But then I look at what we have, and I stop wondering. This is exactly where we're supposed to be.
Even with all the hard parts?
Especially with all the hard parts. They made the rest of this possible.
Catherine made a small sound and grabbed at Alice's hair, and they both laughed. Down in the town, someone rang the dinner bell at the boarding house, the sound carrying clear in the still air. Time to head back. Time to return to the life they'd built and keep building. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of trust at a time. They mounted up and rode down into the canyon as the sun started its drop toward evening. The Lucky Star stood waiting, lamps already lit against the coming dark. Inside, Maisie had the evening shift ready to go. Outside, the town was settling into its familiar rhythms. And up in the nursery, Catherine's cradle waited beside the bed, where Alice and Jonah would fall asleep tonight, tangled together like always. Two people who'd started as a deal and become a family. The story that began with a warrant and a lie ended with a baby girl sleeping in a yellow room, and two people who'd learned that sometimes the truest things grow from the most desperate beginnings. Sometimes the best marriages start as bargains. Sometimes bounty hunters make the best husbands. And sometimes a woman standing behind a bar watching ice form is exactly where she needs to be, to meet the man who will stand beside her through everything that comes next. 3 years and 9 months from first meeting to this August evening. From strangers to partners to parents. From a fake warrant to a real family. From Mesa Verde Crossing's coldest winter to its warmest summer. The journey had been hard and the dangers had been real, but they'd made it through together. And that made all the difference. Alice Sterling Chambers stood in the doorway of the Lucky Star that evening, watching the sun paint the canyon walls in shades of rust and gold. Behind her, Jonah was putting Catherine to bed, his voice soft, as he sang her a song his mother had taught him. The saloon hummed with the evening crowd, voices rising and falling in familiar patterns. Tomorrow there'd be work to do, and problems to solve, and a baby to care for. But tonight, there was just this moment. This pause, this breath of peace earned through fire. She'd been mistaken for a dead woman once, but she'd never been more alive than she was right now, in this place, with these people, building this life. And if that wasn't a happy ending, then she didn't know what was. September came, and the final cattle drive of the season rolled through, smaller but still profitable. October brought the first snow, and the quiet months where the town turned inward and families gathered close. Catherine celebrated her first half year, and Alice celebrated the end of her first year as a mother, both of them surviving better than expected. Jonah celebrated 4 years since walking into the Lucky Star with a warrant, though he did it quietly, because talking about it too much still made Alice throw things at him and jest. On a cold November evening, when the wind howled through the canyon and the fire burned high in the upstairs room, Alice and Jonah sat with Catherine between them on the bed, the quilt wrapped around all three. Catherine was drowsy from nursing, her eyes closing and opening in that slow baby way that meant sleep was coming soon.
We should tell her the story someday, when she's old enough to understand.
What story?
How her parents met, the warrant, the bargain, all of it.
You think she'll believe it?
I'm not sure I believe it sometimes, and I lived it.
It's a good story, though, even with the hired guns and the near-death experiences.
Especially with those parts.
Catherine's eyes finally closed, and her breathing deepened into sleep. Jonah lifted her carefully and carried her to the cradle, tucking her in with practiced ease. Alice watched him, still marveling sometimes at how natural he was with their daughter, how he'd taken to fatherhood like he'd been preparing for it his whole life.
You're staring.
I'm appreciating.
Appreciating what?
How lucky I got. How lucky we both got.
Luck had nothing to do with it. You stood and fought when you could have run. That's not luck. That's courage.
Then, we were both courageous in the right directions.
I'll accept that.
They climbed into bed together and pulled the quilt up, Catherine's soft breathing the only sound besides the wind outside. Jonah's arm came around Alice's shoulders, and she settled against him, her body knowing the shape of his now like she knew her own.
What do you think we'll be doing 4 years from now?
Same as we're doing now. Running a saloon. Raising our daughter. Being married. Maybe adding another baby if we're feeling ambitious.
Another baby?
Just a thought. No pressure.
We'll see. Let me survive this one first.
Fair enough.
They drifted toward sleep, warm and safe, and together. The story of their beginning fading into the story of their present, which would someday fade into the story of their future. But the foundation would hold, because it was built on truth and trust, and the kind of love that didn't need perfect beginnings to create perfect endings. December brought Christmas and Catherine's first experience with snow, her face scrunching up in confusion when Jonah held her outside to feel the flakes fall. January marked 4 full years since the warrant and the bargain, and Alice and Jonah celebrated quietly with dinner in the saloon's back room after closing. Just the two of them, and a bottle of whiskey, and the shared memory of how far they'd come.
4 years.
Best 4 years of my life.
Even the parts where people tried to kill us?
Especially those parts. They make the quiet parts better.
That's a terrible philosophy.
It's the only one I've got.
February thawed into March, and March softened into April, the seasons turning their familiar wheel. Catherine learned to sit up on her own, and then immediately tried to crawl, her determination to move outpacing her coordination by miles. Alice went back to working the bar a few nights a week, just enough to stay connected to the saloon's rhythm without sacrificing time with her daughter. Jonah balanced martial work and fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. On a warm May evening, almost exactly a year since they'd first brought Catherine to the ridge, they made the trip again. Catherine was bigger now, more aware, her eyes tracking the canyon walls and the clouds overhead with obvious curiosity. They sat on the rocks and let her wiggle in the grass, carefully supervised, while they watched the sun drop toward the horizon.
She's going to grow up here. In this place. With this as her normal.
That's not a bad normal. Canyon town. Honest work. Parents who love her.
Parents who met because of a fake warrant and a desperate bargain.
Parents who chose each other. That's what matters.
You always make it sound so simple.
It is simple. We made it complicated for a while, but at its core, it's simple. I love you. You love me. We're raising our daughter together. Everything else is just details.
Alice wanted to argue, but couldn't find the energy. He was right. They'd started complicated, but they'd arrived at simple. And simple was better than she'd ever hoped for standing behind that bar 4 years ago, watching a bounty hunter walk in with death in his pocket and questions in his eyes. They rode back down as the light faded, Catherine dozing against Alice's chest, tired from her adventure. The lucky star glowed warm in the twilight, smoke rising from the chimney, voices drifting out whenever someone opened the door. Home. Real and solid, and earned through every hard choice they'd made along the way. That night after Catherine was asleep and the saloon was closed, Alice and Jonah stood at their bedroom window looking out over the town. The canyon walls rose black against the star-filled sky, the settlement's lights scattered like fallen stars below. 4 years of building. 4 years of growing. 4 years of proving that desperate beginnings could become solid foundations if you worked hard enough and trusted deep enough.
You ever regret it? Any of it?
Not for a single second.
Good. Because I don't either.
He kissed her then, slow and sure, and she kissed him back with 4 years of certainty behind it. Outside, the wind moved through the canyon, carrying the smell of sage and dust, and the promise of summer coming. Inside, they had each other and their daughter, and the life they'd fought for and won. The story that began with a warrant ended here, in a moment of quiet joy 4 years later, with a baby sleeping down the hall, and a saloon standing solid below, and 2 people who'd learned that sometimes the best love stories start as survival stories. And sometimes the person you marry out of desperation becomes the person you'd marry again out of choice, every single day, for the rest of your life. Mesa Verde Crossing, Utah Territory. 4 years after Alice Sterling tried to bargain with a bounty hunter, and accidentally found forever instead. The warrant was long gone. The danger was long past, but the love remained, stubborn and real, and exactly as complicated and exactly as simple as it needed to be. And if you asked either of them whether they'd do it all again, the bad warrant and the desperate deal and the hired guns and the fear, they'd both say yes without hesitation. Because it led here, to this room, this moment, this life, this love. And that made every hard choice worth it. The end of one story, the middle of another, the beginning of everything that came after, stretching out into a future they'd build together one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of trust at a time. Alice Sterling Chambers and Jonah Chambers, formerly strangers brought together by a lie, now family bound together by truth. Some stories end with a kiss at a train station. This one ends with a kiss at a window, overlooking a canyon town, with a daughter sleeping nearby, and a saloon standing ready below, and 2 people who'd earned their happiness the hard way, which made it all the more precious for the earning. 4 years from a cold January morning to a warm May night, From a warrant, to a wedding, to a baby, to a life. From alone to together. From desperate to content. From bargains to love. The journey complete. The circle closed. The story told. And if it wasn't perfect, it was real. And real was always better than perfect anyway. But life doesn't stop for perfect endings. June arrived and the cattle season started up again. Catherine learned to crawl and immediately got into everything. And Jonah had to break up a fight between two drovers that ended with one of them spending 3 days in jail cooling off. The Lucky Star stayed busy. The town stayed peaceful mostly. And the Chambers family kept building their life one ordinary day at a time. Which was exactly how life was supposed to be lived. On a hot July afternoon, when the canyon trapped heat like an oven, Alice sat in the shade of the Lucky Star's porch watching Catherine play with wooden blocks Jonah had carved. A wagon rolled into town, dusty from travel, and a young woman climbed down looking lost and uncertain. Alice recognized the expression immediately. She'd worn it herself once, standing in this same town trying to figure out how to survive what came next.
You look like you could use some water and a place to sit.
The young woman accepted gratefully, and over the next hour, Alice heard a story that sounded familiar. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong name on the wrong paperwork. Different details, but the same desperate core. When the story was done, Alice looked at the woman for a long moment.
I know someone who can help. He's good at sorting out messes that seem impossible. Stay here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to the territorial marshal. He'll know what to do.
The woman's face flooded with relief and gratitude, and Alice felt something settle in her chest. She'd been saved once by someone who saw past the surface to the truth underneath. Now she could pass that forward, help someone else who needed it, continue the chain of survival and trust that had started 4 years ago, with a warrant and a bargain. That evening she told Jonah about the woman, and he nodded, already planning how to help. That was who they were now. People who'd survived impossible situations and used that survival to help others do the same. Not heroes. Just people who remembered what it felt like to be desperate and chose to make sure fewer people had to feel that way.
You're going to help her the way I helped you.
We're going to help her. Together.
I like the sound of that.
Me too.
They worked on the woman's case through the next week. Jonah using his marshal connections, and Alice providing witness testimony and character reference. By the end of July, the charges were dropped, and the woman was free. Her gratitude overwhelming and genuine. She left Mesa Verde Crossing headed for California, with money in her pocket, and a future that didn't include running anymore. Alice watched her go, and felt Jonah's hand slip into hers, their fingers lacing together automatically.
That felt good.
It did. We should do it again.
Help people who need it?
Exactly that.
I'm in.
August passed in a blur of heat and work and Catherine's first birthday. A small celebration in the saloon's back room, with just family and close friends. September brought the final cattle drive and the gradual cooling toward fall. October turned the canyon walls to fire again, and Alice and Jonah took Catherine up to the ridge for the last time, before winter made the ride too dangerous. They sat on their rocks with Catherine between them, almost walking now, determined to explore everything within reach. The sun hung low and golden, painting the world in warm light. Alice looked at her husband and daughter, and felt the weight of 4 years settle into something solid and permanent.
We did okay, didn't we? Starting from where we started?
We did better than okay. We did exactly right.
Even the messy parts?
Especially the messy parts. They taught us how to be us.
Catherine grabbed a handful of grass and tried to eat it, and they both laughed and stopped her. And in that moment, Alice knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. Not because it was easy, or perfect, or simple, but because it was real, and earned, and built with her own hands alongside someone who'd chosen to build it with her. They rode back down as the light faded, Catherine chattering nonsense syllables from her place in Alice's arms. The lucky star waited below, lamps lit and doors open, ready for the evening crowd. Inside, Maisie had everything under control. Outside, the town moved through its familiar patterns. And up in the nursery, Catherine's cradle waited beside the bed, where Alice and Jonah would fall asleep tonight, like they had every night for 4 years. Two people who'd started as a deal and become a family, and would continue being a family for as many years as they were given. The story that began with a warrant and a lie ended here, in a moment of perfect, ordinary peace, with a baby learning to walk, and parents learning that sometimes the best thing you can do is help the next person who needs it. Pass forward the grace you were given. Turn survival into purpose. 4 years and 8 months from that cold January morning to this warm October evening. From strangers, to partners, to parents, to people who'd found their purpose in the helping of others. From Mesa Verde Crossing's coldest winter to its warmest heart. The journey had been long, and the road had been hard, but they'd made it through together, and they'd keep making it through together, whatever came next. Alice Sterling Chambers, formerly mistaken for a dead woman, now very much alive, and building a legacy that had nothing to do with saloons or money, and everything to do with love and trust, and the quiet determination to make the world a little bit better for the people who came after. And if that wasn't a happy ending, then happy endings didn't exist. But they did. They really did. Sometimes they just looked different than expected. Sometimes they looked like a canyon town and a saloon and a marshal and a baby. Sometimes they looked like ordinary life lived with extraordinary purpose. Sometimes they looked exactly like this. The end. For real this time. The story complete. The circle closed. The future stretching out ahead full of possibility and promise and the kind of love that only grows stronger when tested. Alice and Jonah and Catherine Chambers. A family built from desperation and choice, and the stubborn refusal to give up even when giving up seemed like the only option. Mesa Verde Crossing, Utah Territory, October 1903. 4 years and 9 months after a bounty hunter walked into a saloon with a warrant. A lifetime after a woman stood behind a bar trying to survive another winter. An eternity after two people looked at each other and decided to trust even when trust seemed impossible. The best stories are the ones that start rough and end smooth. This one qualified. Rough beginning, smooth middle, beautiful ending. And if anyone ever asked Alice whether she regretted that day Jonah walked through her door, she'd tell them the truth. She'd do it all again, every desperate second, because it led here, to this life, this family, this love, this home, and that made every hard moment worth surviving. The train whistle sounded in the distance, its echo bouncing off the canyon walls, reminding everyone that the world was bigger than this small settlement tucked behind red cliffs. But to Alice and Jonah and Catherine, this small settlement was the world. Everything that mattered lived here. Everything they'd built stood here. Everything they'd become had happened here. November brought the circuit preacher back through town, and Alice and Jonah renewed their vows in the Lucky Star's back room, with Catherine as witness. The same room where they'd married the first time out of desperation. This time, it was different. This time it was choice, pure and simple. No warrants or bargains or fear involved. Just two people saying yes again to what they'd started 4 years ago, making it official in the way that mattered most. The preacher asked if they'd take each other freely, and they both said yes without hesitation. The preacher asked if they'd stay together through whatever came, and they both said yes, like they meant it forever. The preacher pronounced them married again, as if they'd ever stopped being married in the way that counted. And when Jonah kissed Alice, it was exactly like the first time, and nothing like the first time. Familiar and new all at once. After the ceremony, they stood outside the Lucky Star, watching the sun drop behind the western peaks. Catherine balanced on Jonah's hip. The three of them together, as the light faded to purple and the first stars appeared overhead. The train whistle sounded again, closer now, and Alice thought about endings and beginnings, and how sometimes they were the same thing.
We should go down to the station. Watch it come through.
The train? Why?
Because that's where stories like ours are supposed to end. At train stations with whistles blowing and futures arriving on steel rails.
Our story already ended. 4 years ago when I married you. Everything since is just the good part.
Then, let's go watch the good part continue.
They walked down to the station hand in hand, Catherine riding on Jonah's shoulders now, her small hands tangled in his hair. The platform was already crowded with people meeting loved ones or seeing them off. The normal rhythm of a territory town connected to the wider world by these thin steel lines. The train pulled in with a great hiss of steam and screech of brakes, and passengers climbed down, tired from travel, eager for solid ground. One of them was the young woman they'd helped in July, the one Alice had recognized in her own desperation. She spotted them immediately and came over, her face bright. The woman said she'd gone to California and found work and started over. And it was all thanks to them giving her a chance when she had no other options. She said she'd never forget it, would spend the rest of her life passing forward what they'd passed to her. Then she hugged Alice and shook Jonah's hand and climbed back on the train headed east, toward whatever came next for her.
That's why you wanted to come down here. You knew she'd be on this train.
I suspected. Letter came last week saying she was passing through, wanted to thank us proper.
You're getting good at this helping people thing.
Learning from the best.
The train whistle blew one long note, signaling departure. They stood on the platform watching it pull out, steam and smoke trailing behind like memories dissolving into air. When it was gone, and the rails were empty again, Jonah turned to Alice and grinned that quick, bright grin she'd fallen in love with 4 years ago.
So this is our ending? Train station, whistle blowing, future rolling in on steel rails?
This is our ending. Happy and real, and exactly where we belong.
Then I guess we better seal it proper.
He kissed her there on the platform, with Catherine laughing between them and the evening star bright overhead, and the whole town watching without shame. Alice kissed him back and felt the story close around them like a circle completing, like a promise kept, like a beginning and an ending happening all at once. 4 years and 10 months, from a desperate bargain to a train station kiss. From a fake warrant to a real family. From Mesa Verde Crossing's coldest winter to its warmest love story. The journey complete. The promise kept. The story told in full. They walked back up to the Lucky Star as full dark settled over the canyon. Catherine drowsy against Jonah's shoulder. Alice's hand warm in his. Behind them the station lights glowed, and the rails stretched east and west toward worlds they'd never see. Because they had everything they needed right here, in this small settlement, tucked behind red cliffs. Inside the Lucky Star, Maisie had the evening shift running smooth. Upstairs, Catherine's cradle waited beside the bed where Alice and Jonah would sleep tonight and every night after. Two people who'd started as strangers and become family and would remain family until the rails stopped running and the trains stopped whistling and the canyon walls crumbled to dust. The story that began with Alice Sterling standing behind a bar in January 1899, watching a bounty hunter walk in with death in his pocket, ended here, outside the train station in November 1903, with a kiss and a laugh, and a baby sleeping, and a future stretching out clear and bright, and exactly as complicated and exactly as simple as they'd earned it to be. Alice Sterling Chambers and Jonah Chambers. A family built from desperation and choice and trust and love. A story that started wrong and ended right. A life that proved sometimes the best things grow from the hardest beginnings. And sometimes a bad warrant leads to a good marriage. And sometimes bounty hunters make the best husbands after all. And if anyone ever asked them how they met, they'd tell the truth. A warrant, a bargain, hired guns, fake charges, a quilt square note, and a marriage that refused to be treated like a deal. They'd tell it all, the good and the bad, and the desperate, and the beautiful, because that was their story, and they'd earned every word of it. Mesa Verde Crossing, Utah Territory. Late November 1903. Outside the station as the train whistles fade into night. Two people sealing their story with a kiss and a laugh and the quiet certainty that they'd found exactly what they needed in each other. The end. For real and forever. The story complete. The love proven. The family solid. The future theirs to build. And somewhere in the night a train whistle sounded one last time, carrying away the last echoes of the old story and leaving space for the new one to continue. The one where Alice and Jonah and Catherine lived their ordinary, extraordinary life in a canyon town behind red cliffs, far from everywhere that mattered except to them, where it mattered more than anywhere else in the whole wide territory. The end. The real end. The only end that mattered. Outside the station as the train whistles fade. A kiss. A laugh. A family. A love that started as survival and became everything. Mesa Verde Crossing, 1899 to 1903 and beyond. Alice and Jonah Chambers. The story told. The circle closed. The promise kept. Forever. But before they reached the Lucky Star's door, Alice stopped and turned to look back at the station one more time, at the empty platform and the dark rails, and the place where they'd just sealed their story proper. Jonah stopped beside her, waiting patient like he always did when she needed a moment to catch up to her own thoughts.
You know what's funny?
What's that?
4 years ago, I would have run from a train station, tried to disappear onto one of those trains headed anywhere but here. Now, I can't imagine being anywhere else.
That's not funny. That's just true.
True and funny can be the same thing sometimes.
If you say so.
They stood there a moment longer, Alice memorizing the scene like she might need to recall it someday far in the future. The station. The stars. The canyon walls, dark against the sky. Jonah beside her, solid and sure. Catherine sleeping peaceful on his shoulder. Everything exactly as it should be after 4 years of fighting to make it this way.
Okay. I'm ready now.
Ready for what?
To go home and live the rest of our lives.
That's a pretty big thing to be ready for.
Good thing I've got you to help me with it.
Good thing you do.
They walked the rest of the way to the Lucky Star and climbed the stairs to their room, Catherine still sleeping through the transition from shoulder to cradle. Alice changed into her nightdress, and Jonah pulled off his boots, and they climbed into bed together, like they had every night for 4 years and 10 months. The rhythm so familiar now, it didn't need thought. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows gentle, reminding them winter was coming, but not here yet. Inside, they were warm and safe and together, which was all that mattered in the end. Not the big dramatic moments, not the hired guns or the warrants or the deals, just this. 2 people choosing each other every day. 2 people building a life one ordinary moment at a time. 2 people who'd earned their happiness the hard way and knew enough to appreciate it.
You asleep yet?
Not quite. Why?
Just wanted to say I love you, in case I forget to say it tomorrow.
You never forget.
Still, wanted to say it tonight, after the train station and the kiss and all that.
I love you too. Have since the beginning. Even when I pretended it was just a deal.
I know. I could tell.
You could not.
Could too. You get this look. Had it even then.
What look?
The look that says you're trying not to care, but you already do. Same look you had when Catherine was born. Same look you get when you help someone who needs it. Can't hide that look from me.
Fine. You caught me. I cared even when I said I didn't.
Good. Because I did too.
They fell quiet then, sliding toward sleep in that gradual way that came with exhaustion and contentment mixed together. Alice's last thought before sleep took her was that she'd somehow survived the worst thing that could have happened and ended up with the best thing instead. And maybe that was how life worked if you were brave enough to let it. Maybe desperation led to hope if you just held on long enough. Maybe the worst beginnings made the best endings after all. Mesa Verde Crossing slept around them. The town tucked safe in its canyon behind red cliffs. The Lucky Star standing solid. The Chambers family breathing quiet in their room above the saloon. 4 years and 10 months of building. 4 years and 10 months of proving. 4 years and 10 months of turning a desperate bargain into a real love story that ended exactly where it should have. Outside the station. With a kiss. With a laugh. With a family heading home together.